All right, Ryan, can you verify this looks good?
I can see it.
Okay, great. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking to you about cultural differences and a little bit about the intercultural effectiveness scale. I'll move through this pretty briskly, but hopefully it'll give you some really good information in a short amount of time. So before we talk about cultural differences, I do want to acknowledge that if we're looking at the United States, it is vast, it's multicultural, it's really diverse. So what we're talking about here are general cultural values shared by many members of society, but certainly there are many, many exceptions to this in such a multicultural country like America. So we're going to take a look at individualism and collectivism, direct and indirect communication, and linear and flexible time as three substantial cultural values that a lot of people experience anywhere they go in the world when they're studying abroad or coming to this country for the first time. Individualism and collectivism is a massive one. We have a handbook that we can share that has more examples of this as well, of cultural differences. And if you're interested, just let us know. But in terms of individualism and collectivism, a couple things on this screen. One you'll notice is that countries exist on a spectrum of cultural values. Similar to not thinking cultures are good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse, there is no A or B. So some countries, excuse me, might identify strongly with individualism. Some might, think they have values that represent both in many cases. And others, like China, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, that you see there, tend to be a lot more collectivistic. I have some images up at the top there that kind of just represent these things. And I think the top left one is a great one. Individualism in a nutshell is you see yourself as a separate person from everybody else. You're unique. Whereas collectivism is more group oriented. It's the idea that there is no me without we. So relationships are incredibly important. We're going to take a look at some examples of individualism right now and just how that affects our country and our society. So with individualism in the United States, look at the many ways this really influences our way of life. Personal freedom and individual rights. They've been part of our nation's history for so long, and they're big parts of what's happening today. I like to use the example right now of, COVID. Does the government have the right to tell people to wear masks or visit certain places of business, malls, bars, movie theaters, and so forth? Or is that an infringement upon your individual rights, reproductive rights, gun control rights, and things like that? Are all influenced by this individualistic kind of mentality that we have. Privacy and personal space are cherished in this country as well. A big part of our identity is something that we protect, personal space. We have our own bubbles. The interesting thing to think about, if you're from the US, you maybe never really reflected on all of these things before, but they have profound influences on how you perceive your reality. Like I mentioned, independence, being distinct from other people, and that's really who we are, I think, in a lot of cases, and how, we live our lives. Therefore, we've touched upon this. Individual effort, being self-reliant, are incredibly important, and they're valued and they're seen as positive things. Just a few more examples here. Ownership, we've touched upon this. Materialism, even time. We have expressions like "don't waste my time." Competition, that was something we talked about in the breakout rooms, and being confident, right? If you are encouraged to become your own person, to work hard, we express ourselves with confidence, and that's valued. And even something like nuclear families are a big part of many individualistic countries. The contrast with that, and I think it's a profound one with a lot of collectivistic cultures, is this. The emphasis is no longer on you as this own unique individual. If you're always thinking about yourself in terms of your relationships to others, things like harmony become a lot more important. This idea that your identity is really defined not in terms of me, but in terms of we. So therefore, you don't really see yourself as being independent, but interdependent. Connections are very, very important, therefore. Relying on others for support is not only okay, it's expected and it's valued, and that's what's appropriate in many collectivistic cultures. And so you can read the rest of that list, but you kind of get this sense of everything being heavily group oriented. And that's a very, very big different dynamic, I think, that a lot of people experience and a lot of people actually struggle with in many cases too when they're adjusting to a new culture. Another example, in looking at cultural values, we're going to look at communication right now. So you see all these expressions and idioms that we have in the US about communication, this idea, speak your mind, yes means yes. What it all really means is We are a low context or direct communication culture. Good communication in the United States is simple, it's clear, it gets right to the point. And you see a lot of other nations, Australia, Canada, Western Europe, Scandinavia, and so forth, identify more with low context communication. The contrast with that, with high context cultures, they are indirect. So good communication to them is not always being very direct and clear and simple. There's a shared societal understanding about how to convey messages. For example, using body language or using different societal cues, hierarchies. In addition to individualism and collectivism, I find that this is one of the biggest ones that many people struggle with adjusting to new cultures, because you kind of come into, any kind of situation when you're talking to somebody else thinking that your way of communicating is the only one. And then when you find somebody, if you're from a direct culture, communicating indirectly, a lot of miscommunication can ensue, mistrust and things like that. What it really kind of looks like is the US valuing direct communication. If we're communicating with people from really indirect communication cultures and we don't understand why they communicate the way they do because they value relationships, they don't want to rock the boat, upset people. If they're not speaking to you directly, in some cases for an indirect culture versus direct, we value direct communication. So other people might perceive us as being really abrupt. This yes means yes, being clear and to the point. We might be perceived as being rude or disrespectful or self-centered in how we convey ourselves and how we communicate. Of course, that's not our intent. That's just good communication in our culture, to be right to the point, to be direct. Similarly, when you look at indirect communication, if you're from the United States and you live in one of these cultures, you might think that somebody's being really evasive or even dishonest if they're not telling you exactly what they mean or what they feel or what they think. That can be a big challenge. So you might ask somebody their opinion about something or if they can do something and they say maybe, or they just don't answer for you for a few days because they don't want to say no, because that would be rude in their culture. Whereas you would think, just tell me no if no means no. They wouldn't want to do that because they value your relationship, and they have to think about how can they say that in any number of different ways that wouldn't upset you and wouldn't damage your relationship. So this can be really confusing and very, very difficult to get used to. It's a subject that requires a lot more time than we have now, but I hope this just kind of illustrates why miscommunication happens across cultures. And the last one, something that many, many people experience, is a different concept of time. I don't know if you've ever really reflected on the United States and how punctual we are, how much we value time, how we think it's limited, but it looks like this. In the US and many other cultures, being on time and being punctual and organizing our time is what's considered appropriate. A lot of other countries have a more flexible understanding of time. So linear time, what the United States and a lot of other nations that you see tend to value, means basically we do A, then we do B, then we do C. We do things sequentially. We organize so much of our lives based upon clocks and calendars and schedules. So therefore, deadlines, punctuality are really important. That's what's expected of everybody, because we do think that time is scarce, and that's why you see all those expressions. It's really important to understand that many, many other countries and cultures around the world don't have that understanding of time. It might seem, really strange to them why we're so obsessed with time and cherish it like that, because for them, time is abundant. You don't have to do everything in order. Multitasking and being flexible is the norm. So that's kind of what it looks like. In the United States and these other countries, our concept of time, it is something that values being punctual, being efficient, being busy. Being busy is a really valued thing in the United States. It's why we work so hard. It's why so many people don't use their vacation days. So, this is linear. It's also known as clock time. And the contrast with that is flexible time, where time is abundant and it's not limited. You are expected to kind of go with the flow, and you've probably heard that before, island mentality and things like that. So a key point, that we talked about in the beginning, don't see this as one being right or wrong or good or bad. It's just two different ways of experiencing life, and they both have their value, right? One might emphasize the relationships and the events, that flexible time where that's what you cherish. That's the best use of your time. The linear time might be more of how to get things done and be really efficient. So there's things to learn from both. There's things to appreciate from both, just like any kind of cultural difference. The last thing I'm going to talk about really quickly with you is developing intercultural skills. And this kind of relates to the intercultural effectiveness scale. Incidentally, I sent many of you an invitation for that. You have until this Friday to take that. If you weren't able to take it by the time of our session today, totally fine. You can go ahead and take that anytime until next Friday. But I just want to give you a quick overview of what the intercultural effectiveness scale is before I conclude my part of this session. So the IES, it's a tool really to help you understand where am I at in terms of my intercultural understanding, what we've been talking about, my understanding of how to engage with people from different backgrounds. It's not a test, so it's not like you get a good score or a bad score. These are lifelong skills after all, like I've talked about. So don't perceive it that way. Take it to help you understand this is me, this is where I'm at. So you're measured on things that are really important to cultural understanding, your self-awareness. I'll jump ahead to this. How well you know your values and how they're perceived by other people. Exploration. Do you look at new and different experiences as an opportunity to learn, or do you prefer more comfortable things and more comfortable surroundings, having a routine? World orientation. Are you somebody who's interested in understanding what's happening around the world? You follow international news. You think that's really relevant to your life and that's meaningful. Or, do you kind of avoid that? Maybe thinking back to denial and being isolated and things like that. You don't really have an appreciation for that and maybe don't want to follow those kinds of things. Relationship development is really important. Do you want to put forth the time and effort to meet people who are different from you and develop those meaningful conversations? Or are you somebody who likes to have kind of a closer circle of friends, shared values, and that's what brings you joy and comforts, which is totally fine. Everybody is an individual. But if you want to develop intercultural skills, you do kind of want to push yourself a little bit to move more towards standard and high definitions of these things. Positive regards really means you reserve judgment. You try to avoid stereotyping, assumptions, which is really easy to do about people from different backgrounds because we automatically try and make sense of things and understand those. And it's difficult to stop and think, hey, there's a deeper meaning to this. I have to ask questions. I have to be curious. Ask yourself, how do I know what I know about somebody from a different culture or belief? And really try and answer that by talking to them, by learning as much as you can before you judge. And finally, emotional resilience is another thing that's assessed. And you think about all of these things, living in a different country and culture, it's challenging, right? It's stressful. That's why we have culture shock. That's why it's difficult to live overseas and people struggle sometimes with loneliness and isolation. Emotional resilience is basically, do you bounce back from that? Can you recover from stressful, challenging situations? So you'll get, a result from 1 to 7 about each of the 6 things that I kind of went through. And it's a really nice tool because what you can do is, you get your scores and then you can basically plot them. These are the 3 main dimensions here. You'll get a result and you can kind of just connect these dots in your report because you get a 20-page report right after taking it, and you plot what your results are, and then you'll get kind of a profile about your intercultural skills. So you can do that and read a little bit more about who you are culturally and your values. And then it goes even further into those 6 things that I just talked about. And you can kind of use like your self-awareness and your exploration score to read a little bit more about you as an individual. So on page 14 of your report, you do that for self-awareness and exploration. On page 16, relationship and development and world orientation. And then on page 18, you can do that for positive regard and emotional resilience. It's a really, really great tool, I think, to help you understand your intercultural skills and give you an idea, what could I do to improve these skills that are going to be very valuable for the rest of my life. So if you haven't taken it yet, like I said, you have until Friday. I definitely encourage you to do so. I think it'd be a wonderful, wonderful way for you to develop these things that are very important for your life and to connect with people from different backgrounds more effectively. So I think that brings me to the end of my time, Ryan. I'm going to turn it over to you for the cultural iceberg. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you learned it and learned something and enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, so much. And as Adam said, the IES is a powerful tool to help you understand where you are in your intercultural skills. If you didn't already sign up for it, we will send everybody a link to it after this session so that you can still take the IES and honestly learn a lot about yourself. So I'm going to finish up the last section of today's presentation is what are some things we can do to start practicing and developing these intercultural skills? Adam has given us this great tool, the IES, to help us understand where we are with intercultural skills, but what do we do to actually practice them and develop them? So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll finish out and we'll have some time for questions at the end. Oh, okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. And you should see an iceberg there. And I'd be really curious if somebody wants to unmute in regards to what we're talking about today, which is culture. I'd be very curious to know, what is your interpretation of this picture? What's the significance of this iceberg? Anybody have any idea they'd like to share?
I think one interpretation is how you see a lot of, I guess, news articles or just kind of like things in the media where you might see kind of like a glance at different countries around the world, but there's obviously a lot more than you can see just from, everything that you see on TV.
Right, yeah. We're getting glimpses, maybe little snapshots of culture. I remember I studied abroad in Russia one year as an undergrad and meeting some Russian students my age. It was hilarious to talk about what we knew about each other's countries and realizing how much of that came from movies. You know, everybody is a KGB spy, according to American media, and all Americans are cowboys. Like it was these ridiculous ideas, but when we drilled down, that's really all we knew about each other, and it was because of these little snapshots. Yeah, good point, Abigail. Uh, a lot of times when we travel or we think about experiencing other cultures, there are these values that are immediately visible, right? We can see their dances, their music, their literature. We can eat their food. And those are our first levels of exposure when we think about culture. We think about another country's culture. These are usually the things that come to mind. But these are really just the surface. These are just the easily viewable, or what we call primarily in awareness. They're the ones that are tangible. They're right in front of us. But there is a whole wealth of values below that. Just like an iceberg, what we see is just the tip, the 10%, the expression of those values. And it's these values that are primarily out of awareness that are really what's driving a lot of a person's culture. These are pretty complex ideas. And you can see, I don't expect you to read all of those. There's tons of them there. You can see there's some pretty heavy ideas. Things like notions of modesty. Where did that come from for you? Where did you learn what is appropriate to wear in public and what is not appropriate to wear? What is appropriate to wear at work? What is appropriate to wear at home? What about leadership? What is your idea of good leadership? And how much of that came from where you grew up or your family's culture? Another one, patterns of handling emotions, right? These are big, complex ideas. And if I were to ask you right now, where did you get your notion of modesty? You may have to like scratch your head and think about it for a little bit. You may not have an answer readily available. So when we think about connecting with people and their culture, we have to realize we can pretty easily connect with those surface level things, the tip of the iceberg. But it's these underlying notions that require very open conversations and a lot of patience on the part of both people who are trying to share these ideas, because we need to examine them for ourselves before we can really explain them to somebody else. Why do you always do that? Why do Americans always do this? I don't know. Why do we do that? I've never thought about that. This is the starting point for really developing intercultural skills, is understanding your cultural values that are primarily out of awareness. Now, I'm not going to assign you homework because this isn't a class, but I really encourage you to come back after this session, and this PowerPoint will be available so you can view it, and look through some of these and choose one or two of these cultural values below the water and really think through it for yourself. Where did you learn that value? Who were your models for that value growing up? And do all Americans or all Vietnamese or all Chinese Malay, do they all view this value the same way? Probably not. So this is a good way to start digging into understanding your own culture, which can then be a springboard for trying to connect with other people. You can ask them, hey, can you show me some of your food? Hey, can you show me that dance I saw a video of on YouTube? But really starting to get into these concepts is really get into the heart of people's culture. This is a fantastic quote from a Nigerian author, Ms. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who delivered one of my absolute favorite TED Talks in 2009 called The Danger of a Single Story. She says, I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place or person. We have this idea of what someone from India is like. We have this idea of what someone from Korea is like, but oftentimes it's based on maybe one piece of information, one story. And what we need to do is understand that each of us has a wealth of experiences that have made us who we are and that have shaped our experiences. And we need to be open to letting people tell their stories, learning what we can about the places that we're interested in, so that we're not just bringing a single story. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going somewhere where you are the outsider. You are the obvious person who doesn't belong there. And the assumptions that people put on you, for me, it was, oh, you're an American, therefore, blah, blah, blah. All these stereotypes, right? That's a single story of an American. That's not who I, Ryan Thompson, as an American am. And so be mindful of that as you start talking to people from other cultures. Are you coming at it with a single story? Are you open to hearing what their stories are, what their experiences are like? You might find there's more similarities than not. One tool to help you have that conversation or to examine moments of cultural communication is called changing your lens, and lens being an acronym. Now, there's a great resource for this that I've made available in the files for this channel. I'll share a link to it here for you shortly as well. But I just want to tell you a story that kind of illustrates this. When I first moved to Vietnam, I was out having dinner with some of my friends. Some of them were Vietnamese, some were Americans, British, expats. So it was a mix of people. And we're sitting there having dinner. The waitress comes over. She takes our orders, right? And she's coming to refill drinks. And as I'm watching, other Vietnamese patrons at the restaurant are snapping their fingers and yelling out, "Em ơi! Em ơi!" And I was shocked. I was embarrassed. I used to be a waiter, and I couldn't imagine somebody snapping their fingers at me or yelling at me to get my attention, right? It's my job as a waiter to come and check regularly so that you don't need to yell at me. I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so rude. Why are they doing that? And then I would see the waiter or waitress come scurrying over, and in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, they must be so like embarrassed and scared or nervous. These were all of the feelings I was having, and it was very unsettling for me to experience this. Well, I thought about it afterwards, and I talked to some of my friends, my Vietnamese friends, and I asked them, I was like, is this normal? Like, I would be really embarrassed. And I explained my thoughts on it, and they were able to explain to me, well, em ơi just means you. Hey, you. It's a way of getting somebody's attention, and it's not that embarrassing. There are ways to be polite about it, ways to be impolite, but it's not uncommon. So I had to adjust my expectation. Let's think about that process. If I were to re-examine that story that I told and write down everything I heard, it helps me get a record of what I just experienced, that weird moment of conflict where my experience is very much out of sync with what's happening around me. Write down that experience, list it, try to be as objective as possible and just describe what happened. When you do that and you have a record of it, you go back and look at it and you examine your assumptions. What words did I use to describe the other patrons or to describe the waiters? I used words like rude, embarrassing, scurry, right? Like they're afraid. These are values that I was imposing on that situation that weren't necessarily accurate. So when I write down the experience, I can go back and really think, what are my assumptions that I'm bringing to this moment? Lastly, note other possibilities. Maybe they're used to snapping and yelling to get people's attention. Maybe that's just how they do things and I'm not used to it, right? Try to think out, brainstorm some ideas of why they might do things differently. And here's the key part. Substantiate your ideas with locals. Ask them, hey, is it rude for people to yell out "Emoy" to get the waiter's attention? Maybe they're not, but to me it seems rude. Is that true? And then they can let you know, oh yeah, that's very rude. They shouldn't have done that. Or no, that's actually very common, right? Getting that outside perspective is what's going to help you start to learn and reflect on these moments that you have. And I call these aha moments. So be mindful of when you have aha moments that will allow you to reflect on your experience and how it might be different. What are some aha moments that maybe you've experienced? I gave you an example of a restaurant in Vietnam. I had similar experiences in grocery stores while driving, right? A lot of opportunities to have that aha moment. Have you ever had that kind of moment? If so, please feel free to share. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll pause for just a second. Just a few more seconds. All right. Be thinking and be mindful of those moments where you feel maybe unease, where you're not quite sure how things are supposed to be going. Lastly, be aware that just because we have the most diverse campus, in Texas, I believe, we have an incredibly diverse campus. But it isn't just enough to acknowledge that. We need to engage with it. We need to start reaching out to people, talking to them. But that starts with knowing yourself and thinking about those underlying cultural values, the bottom of the iceberg that we looked at earlier. Learn what you can about other cultures by reading, but then also reach out to others. Ask them their ideas behind those cultures and expose yourself to something that's different. There are a lot of opportunities to do that, even right now when we're having to interact through screens. You could look at global engagement. There are programs, they have a lot of programs that are there to promote intercultural dialogue and development. I'll share their website here in just a moment, but definitely encourage you to take a look at their program offerings. There are also loads of cultural student organizations on campus, 30 to 40 different student organizations. You just need to find the culture that you're interested in and reach out. They'll organize events, they'll organize discussion opportunities, chances to meet up virtually and discuss these ideas. There are intercultural classes available. You can talk to your academic advisor to see if they fit your degree plan. One of those global engagement programs is the language exchange program, where you can focus on learning a language from a native speaker. And honestly, even though it's a little creepy, people watching is a fantastic way to try to pick up on some of those cultural cues. So go somewhere where maybe you're in a different cultural setting, and then just take notes using the lens method about what people are doing differently. Think about other opportunities that you have to engage with people who are different. As Adam said, this is a great practice to do, not just with people from another country, but different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions. There are a lot of opportunities to engage with ideas on a deeper level through conversation. There are some resources available that you can take a look at afterwards. I encourage you to look at the Hofstede Insights, which is a free comparison of different cultural values. The Danger of a Single Story is that TED Talk, which really helps us think about the stories that people tell about their lives and how multifaceted we are. And then if you haven't read the book Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, it's a fantastic examination of just a different experience, a different culture experience through someone else's background. You can reach out to us via email. And then we do have upcoming events for our series. We encourage you to attend. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at budgeting as it relates to international experiences, but also budgeting tips for life that can help you now. So we really encourage you to plug into the series. and we hope to see you there. I know we went a little bit long, so thank you all so much. For those of you who are still here, if anybody has any questions, we're happy to leave it open. I'm going to put a few links here in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Colleen. Thanks so much for your help.
Ryan, if you'll stop recording, I'll talk.